So I want to tell you a story today that involves popular culture, sports, medicine, engineering, innovation, a lot about design actually. And at the end I want to leave you with some hope. And to me this is going to be a talk about how science, medicine, engineering come together to hopefully preserve something that we all love and has many other applications. So I'm going to dive into it here real quick. Football. Who likes football? Anybody? A few football fans here, especially in Chicago. We all have family members who play, or some of our parents played. Some of us might have played. It's part of America, American culture. It's a game that requires intensity, practice, learning, but there's a lot of physicality to it too. This is where a lot of kids spend time, out on the field. They're with their buddies, they're being coached. There's the team, the camaraderie, the brotherhood of football. It's hard to explain what this means to a lot of people. There are places around the country, you go to Texas, it's everything for these small towns. Friday night is where everybody gathers. Saturday morning papers reporting on who won the game, who didn't, who the stars are. Many of our heroes, Joe Namath, Peyton Manning, these are people that we look up to for various reasons, the athleticism, just the sheer endurance to be able to become a pro athlete, you know how hard that is. So I'm an SEC guy, I went to University of Florida. This is the swamp, fills up 70, 80,000 people every Saturday. I used to be amazed when I was at school that the population of Gainesville would double every Saturday. I had buddies who didn't even go to school in Gainesville, would drive from Miami, where I'm from, just to hang out. They didn't even have a ticket. Tailgating, American tradition, right? We all gather, barbecue some stuff that's bad for us and hang out and then go to the game. It's amazing what these guys do. They go out there, they make catches that if I did that, I don't think I would stand up again, right? I mean, it's amazing, amazing stuff. This is Seattle. There's an unbelievable amount of energy. It's one of the loudest stadiums in the country. It's just a circus. It's amazing. It's hard to explain being there. The Super Bowl, year in and year out, is an event that we all get together with our friends and family, and we cook out and we watch and root for our teams. Like the swagger and the cool factor of football. So why am I here? I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon, practice full-time at Seattle Children's Hospital. So most of my days in the operating room taking care of kids, my office, if you will. Several years ago, I got interested in concussion. And when I was training, I'm not that old, I've been out in practice about 10 years, we never even learned about concussion. It wasn't even on the radar screen. Now all of a sudden it's front page news every day. It's unbelievable. You hear about the good and the bad and the ugly around football and concussion. And I got very interested in this and started to work with the many great providers at my institution, and I help run the concussion program at Seattle Children's. And I've had the experience of taking kids who are amazing athletes. They've been concussed multiple times, and I have to sit with them and their mom and dad and say, you cannot play football or other sports, okay? It's hard to explain sort of the emotion that is wrapped up in these games that people play. And many people in this audience, I'm sure, were good athletes and can relate to this. But I have difficult conversations all the time in my work. I'm taking out brain tumors, doing different stuff that are obviously hugely impactful. But you sit down with a family and this kid who might have a scholarship and you go, okay, you've been doing this your entire life and now you can't do it. Okay, it's unbelievable. It's one of the hardest conversations that I have. Fortunately, I don't have to do that too often. I work at a great research university. We're interested in understanding concussion. The science of it is very young, but it's getting more attention, getting money, which is good, and so I think we're learning a lot. Also, the last couple of years have been interesting, so the NFL started to put neurosurgeons on the sideline at every game. So every NFL game, there's a neurosurgeon on the home team and the visiting team. So I've had the experience of also taking care of these NFL guys on the field and at the stadium when they get concussed, evaluating them. So I've seen sort of a broad mix of both youth athletes and pros. This movie to me is very important because it really brought to the forefront the concern around concussion and what we need to try and do as a society to not only just understand concussion, but deal with it. You know, we don't like seeing these images. Football is a violent game, It's supposed to be played with intensity. Maybe not that much intensity, but that's my team, so that's probably okay. And who used to love the hits, right? I remember like in college, you'd sit there and you're like, blood makes the grass grow. You're like waiting for these huge hits and everybody's cheering. And now I look at it and I'm like, we're all horrified, right, when we see this. So like our culture has changed. And there's these notable tragedies that have happened that it's important that we acknowledge and try and understand, why did this happen to this guy or other players like him? And there are things we can do differently to help reduce the risks of these things happening. So concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury. We actually don't really know why it happens, and it's part of the difficulty with the science of it. So the brain is like jello, okay, nice firm jello, and it has millions and millions, billions of neurons, interconnections, and we think that a concussion is a metabolic process the majority of the time. It's not a structural problem. Because when we do MRI images and we do these very fancy techniques where we're looking at the MRI, and this is called tractography, looking at the connections that happen in different parts of the brain, you can do some really amazing stuff with MRI. There is not a biomarker, whether it's an imaging study or a blood test, that allows you to A, diagnose a concussion, but B, know when it's resolved. So for us, concussion's a clinical diagnosis, right? And we do these very rudimentary things. So have them stand, can they balance with their eyes closed for a period of time? Just really basic stuff, looking at the vestibular system, balance system of the brain. How do the eyes work? The eyes are a nice window into the brain and how it's functioning. And just simple things like having somebody follow your finger, you can actually get quite a good look into how the brain is working. You can see what's called nystagmus. Their eyes flicker at the outer edges of their gaze. It's actually reasonably sensitive. And then we ask them all the questions. Do you know where you're at, and all this stuff. It was really interesting at the game that I was covering recently. We took the player back who's clearly concussed, and he just started to cry. And I've had this happen with like 3 or 4 of these guys. It was a really weird experience. A guy like 4 times as big as me. I'm doing the exam. I'm worried he's going to throw me across the room. And then he just starts bawling. So it's a weird phenomenon. Sometimes with concussion, you can have emotional lability, but it impacts the brain in ways that we really still don't understand. So how do these events actually happen? So there is some science now that's developing behind this. So we think that linear impacts, straight-on impacts, are less likely to cause a concussion. We think that rotational forces, where the brain is actually turning in the skull, are more likely to cause it. So these are tangential blows or shearing type impacts where you're hit on the side, potentially. The concern is, how do you address this stuff? So many people have come forward and said, football, get rid of football, okay? Football, dead, done, over. We're not playing football in this country anymore, done. My take on this has been a couple of things. And this is Dr. Mahler. This is a great, read this. It's really interesting. I respect him very much. He's changed the entire conversation around concussion, put it on the forefront. There's millions of dollars coming to this now in terms of research, largely because of him. But he, in this op-ed piece, says you shouldn't play football till you're 18 years old because it's like smoking cigarettes. I think that's a little hard for me to accept at this point, but it's harder for me to accept from a practical standpoint. It just seems a little unrealistic. So I think there's other things that we can do, and I'll talk about that in a moment. If you're going to ban football, where do you stop? Okay? So I take care of all these kids who have concussions. What do you think's the number 2 cause of concussion? Girls' soccer. Girls are nasty. They play hard. Head to head, head to ground. Lacrosse, for all the fancy people in the audience. Girls lacrosse, they don't even require helmets. Insane, okay? So we have lacrosse, girls soccer, that's a good one. Boys soccer, hockey helmets. So there's some independent rating scores for helmets. There's several football helmets that get a 5-star. It's like a crash test thing. The best hockey helmet, 3-star. It's like a no recommend. That's the best thing you can go and buy your kid at the store. Why? It's insane. So we don't want this stuff happening. The other thing I would mention is the money around football and just sports in general. It's unbelievable. Okay, Dallas Cowboys, That institution's worth about $5 billion. All NFL franchises about $60 billion, and there's many notable, very wealthy guys who own those teams. 75 million people in the US, and it's probably an underestimate, do fantasy football, track their players. Billions of dollars are spent every year on gambling around football. There are many kids that football is their opportunity to elevate themselves, get a college education, get a scholarship to college. And you can make many arguments whether that's good or bad, and that's not my purpose to be here today. But I want to tell you what the reality is today in many, many communities around the United States. This is Oregon. Nike, Phil Knight, donates millions and millions of dollars to the university. A lot of that goes into the academic programs, too. Their facilities are unbelievable for recruiting these kids. And then you guys also pay a lot of money to have a stadium in your city, because that generates billions of dollars in revenue because you go out to eat and you buy a hot dog and people fly into your community to watch a game. That's a nice new stadium. That costs a couple bucks. It's part of popular culture. And I think football teaches, and many sports teach these lessons, and they get kids out and active. This has been one of the arguments that people have been making, is that we have this obesity epidemic. Get kids outside, exercise. Life lessons are learned playing these games. Gerald Ford played. Vince Lombardi. Okay, teamwork, commitment, sacrifice, discipline, will to win, leadership, experience, toughness, passion, confidence. All these things come from participating in these sports. So I'm going to talk about the helmet here briefly. Initial game, 1869. They didn't wear helmets. And football used to be a yuppie game. Yale, Harvard, Princeton. They suck now, but they used to be the best, right? This is where the game was played. And what happened at the turn of the century, a bunch of the kids died. They had skull fractures, epidural hemorrhages, and they died. And it was becoming such a big deal that the President of the United States actually got involved, called the university presidents together and said, you guys need to fix this. Apparently his son was a freshman at Harvard playing football. So he had a personal interest. They started wearing helmets. They changed some of the rules of the game. This is what the original helmets look like. They tested them out appropriately, as we'll talk about in a minute. Time evolves, 50s, helmets change shape, a little more robust, some changes to them. 70s, okay? Really the current form of helmets, polycarbonate shell, liner inside, face mask. And then the evolution and speed of development, innovation slows. And if we look critically at current helmets that are out there today, they're still a polycarbonate shell. They've got padding, looks fancy, but there hasn't been any real modification, real improvement. These do a great job at preventing a skull fracture or these catastrophic brain injuries, epidurals, subdural hemorrhages. They were not designed to treat concussion at all. That was not what they're intended for. They have cool slits and air comes through, and they've got cool buckles that are way better than they were 20 years ago. And Rydell, to their credit, the #1 manufacturer, put this little slit in the front so that if you impact in that one location, you get the benefit of that thing moving a little bit. So we have a very challenging problem here. It's called physics. For those who forgot the equation, force equals mass times acceleration. There's our buddy Newton. I think of what we're doing in terms of car analogies, okay? You're going down the road at 60 miles an hour. You need to slow down so that you don't crash into the wall. We put up barriers, okay? We're decelerating over distance. Cars in the 70s, crappy, okay? You get in a car wreck, the likelihood you're gonna die, way higher than it is today. Why is that? Because today's cars, there's airbags, there's crumple zones. We protect the occupant inside the car. The challenge we've got is we got to slow this acceleration in about 1.5 to 2 inches. It's harder, okay? It's a particularly challenging physics problem. So I want to point out and give credit to my colleague, Dr. Per Reinhold. He's the chair of mechanical engineering at the University of Washington. I reached out to Per and said, I'm really interested in this problem. I'm worried about kids. I want to see them be able to play these games that we all love safer. Are you interested? So Per's a great guy, and we started working on these problems. And he mentioned this guy, Euler. Go back a couple centuries. He is interested in columns and how do columns behave. So we think of columns as holding things up, but what we've recognized is that columns can be used in different ways. So if you make it out of certain materials, it has what are called nonlinear properties. and it can absorb force very well and reduce the acceleration. As the columns bend and move, some of that force goes away. So this is high-speed imaging of the shell. Those are the columns that collapse. The head gets cushioned. This is a game we all played, right, in junior high and high school, egg drop. I think of the same analogy here. But I've got a particularly difficult problem as I'm making this. Okay, I can solve all the physics. I can make it this big. It's better. Works way better. Okay? But I can tell you, that guy, he's not going to put that on ever. Ever, ever, ever. He'd rather go out and just play. Because we're talking about kids, and we're talking about young male athletes, and they want to look cool. Okay, so the design piece comes in here. We had a spectacular firm called Artifact in Seattle work with us to do industrial design. We talked to players and coaches and equipment managers and tried to understand what should a helmet look like? Should it be really modern looking, like a space helmet? Everybody's going to go, oh, that's wicked, that's really cool. We come to find out that people want a football helmet to look like a football helmet. You can jazz it up a little bit, but not too much. And it still needs to look fierce and tough because they're going out there to battle. Not that, okay? This guy had multiple concussions. This is going back a few years. He's looking for a solution. They created this foam bonnet for him. He got made fun of in the NFL, which is bad. So we have to provide something that fits well, looks good, and most importantly, functions to protect the player. So what did we end up coming up with? So I'm going to do my disclaimer because it's important. There's nothing that I'm going to come up with that's going to eliminate concussions completely. The goal of what we're doing is to reduce the risk of concussion. Can you bring football back into the median of sports where it's not an outlier? There's an acceptable risk with sports that we all take. With daily life, can we bring football back into a place where it can be played more safely? I work at a great research university where I met Per. I was actually at a medical meeting, and a buddy of mine was up on stage. They're talking about new foam, and I just sat there. This is before all this happened. I just sat there and I went, God, all these incremental changes, we are never going to get there. And I sketched on a napkin. It was basically that. Sorry for all the graphics people who were doing that cool stuff earlier. And I came back, and I didn't know Dr. Ryan Hall. I just said, hey, can we sit down and talk? And I brought this now very embarrassing and official document to him. And we just started talking about it, and the column thing evolved out of that over time. I don't like math, and he does, and that helped a lot, and we went through and really started to understand what we were trying to accomplish. And this is honestly the first thing we did. We had these flat sheets of these columns, handmade this stuff, then started testing it. And the evolution of this happened. We started to bring in some students who were working on the project and later hired some people. There's a nice incubator at the university. We were hand making these molds initially out of it looks like a colander. You're going to dump your spaghetti in it, but it's making this. And so we made flat sheets, and then we made little yarmulkes, and then we made these bowls, and then we made things that look like helmets. Testing. This is the final product. There's multiple pieces like this that go into the helmet when it's assembled. We realized also we want to make sure that we're going and protecting what was originally the problem. Make sure you don't get a skull fracture. So we have a hard inner shell to prevent that. We realized there are multiple opportunities. The industry is very antiquated. If you're a leading NFL quarterback, so I'll take Russell Wilson because it's my home team. The helmet he gets is the same helmet that you and I can go buy down the street at Dick's Sporting Goods. Tiger Woods, custom golf clubs, non-football. If it doesn't fit, they shim it. So we realize there's a great opportunity here to look at every aspect. We're just starting from scratch with no preconceived ideas. So how do you fit helmets? So I got a bunch of data from professional teams, military, and realized that people group out into these different boxes. And we would make different shells and then customize the liner for those players. And by custom, I mean we have multiple shapes and sizes and can get a custom fit. We actually measure people's heads, get them sized up. Big design process, understanding how to make this stuff, scale it, make it manufacturable, comfortable. The inside of this thing's really cool. It feels like leather. We can put graphics on it. If a guy has a little saying he likes, we can stamp that in there, put his number, all kinds of stuff that when you're 18 or 24 and you're making millions of dollars is cool to you. We've got a great team. Everybody's super passionate about this. It's so fun for me to leave the hospital and go over to our building and see these guys working. Everybody wants to do this for the right reason. We realized too that along the way, like, people just haven't looked at things that make common sense here. So even taking a helmet off is a challenge. Like right now, at the beginning of the season, we go to the VMAC, which is a training facility for the Seahawks. To get a helmet off, how do you think we get the jaw pads out? We take popsicle sticks, tongue depressors, tape them together, and have to pry them off. This is in the situation where you're worried somebody might have a high cervical spinal cord injury. Like, what are we doing? This is insane. So I went back, told the guys this issue. They designed these pop-off jaw pads that can come off so you can more easily remove the helmet. Like, why has this stuff not been done? I don't know, but we're trying to be the ones to do it. This is the helmet. This was what came out of the industrial design process. Looks very cool, neat venting. This is the way the helmet works. There's 4 layers. Feels firm, but when you hit it with enough force, it indents. We were very fortunate to win a grant that was administered both by NFL, Under Armour, and GE. That was some of the early funding that we've got. We've now raised $25 million. This is expensive. I was like, can't we do this for like 50 grand? And the answer is no, apparently. Testing, huge. Okay, so this is a scientific endeavor. This is not a retail product in my mind. So we have our own test facilities. We take the helmets. We have instrumented head forms and necks, do high-speed photography while they're hit. And we can replicate both linear and rotational force with the helmet when we test it. Review the results and then iterate to get better. So this is the helmet, drop test. We do this at different height, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 foot drop. And you can see the helmet absorbs that impact. Then we go back and we figure out how to make it better. We're finding that compared to the leading helmet, we can see improvements up to 50%. Why is that important? There's not enough literature in this space, but there are a couple articles in my world. One in particular looked at an older helmet and a newer style helmet. They instrumented the player, found that if you reduce the force by a small percent, you can see a 40% reduction in concussion. So what was a 5% reduction in force equated in this prospective study into a 40% reduction in concussion. Now, is that going to hold? I honestly, I don't know. I hope so, because that would mean astronomical improvement in the risk. But these are things that we want to test. And my mission is to keep us focused and centered on the health and safety. My main motivation here has been to get kids out and in these sports, playing safely. The helmet's now out being tested, semi-pro teams. They're wearing it, doing drills. We're learning, iterating, fit, finish, all this design stuff that I didn't understand. I now understand super important. We've been very lucky. The Seahawks, many NFL teams, many Division I NCAA teams have allowed us to come to them and learn. This is Bobby Wagner at the Seahawks. This is the VMAC facility that they're in here. It's fun to like kind of be that nerdy guy with Pair 2, start to build something that we think is really going to be very important. To me, this is about a couple of things. It's about understanding what we know about medicine and concussion, bringing that to the engineers so that we can design solutions that we think are going to be effective. This is us dropping next to that leading competitor's helmet. It's very easy to see the difference. This is William, my buddy. He's 5. My wife's horrified. He loves football. We have great season tickets when I'm not working the game. And we have the same conversation at home that many of you are having. And I'm like, yeah, go play football. It's awesome. You're a dude. Go do it. My wife's like, over my dead body. He's not going to play football. So I'll know that I have won when my wife feels comfortable with William going and playing football. That is my litmus test here. And then there's Abby. And she's physical, and she's going to play soccer, or she's going to play lacrosse, or she's going to play one of these other sports that have concussion that's inherently part of the game. Can we take the technology that we're initially applying to football and do other things? Ski helmets, bike helmets, hockey, lacrosse. We can, and we will go there. So to me, this is about expanding my influence. In a given career, most neurosurgeons will operate on maybe 8,000 or 10,000 people. Seems like a lot. It is. It's extraordinarily rewarding. I touch people's lives one by one. But this to me is different. This is the ability to really make an impact and to improve what I love. I love sports. And get technology, be disruptive, use design to make something that we think is going to be really important. Thank you.